I'm going to start, Gez, asking you the one question that I know a lot of people are interested in is, what exactly is Lego serious play?
First of all, I should put a little health warning there that it's a particularly difficult thing to explain because it's experiential. You've got to get your hands on it, and you can explain it to people all you like, but they're not really going to understand it until they've got some bricks in their hand. So I will do the best that I can, but if any of you ever get the opportunity, go and do it in person because you'll get so much more. But I'll tell you a little bit about it. So what it is, first of all, is it's a globally recognized facilitation method. And it's usually used for groups of people. But what's really important about it is, okay, we all know it involves Lego and people get excited about it involving the Lego, but the bricks are the catalyst really for helping people think differently, to break sort of habitual thinking or patterns of thinking, the normal routes that we go down when we go into a meeting room and, you know, you see the whiteboard and you see the flip chart and you see the bowl of sweets, whatever, people go into a particular way of thinking. So what the bricks help you do, they are the catalyst for a different way of thinking. So it's not only your thinking, the bricks are then also the vehicle for you being able to communicate that thinking much more clearly to someone else. So clearer thinking, but then clearer explanation, and then hopefully clearer understanding from the people on the other side. And it's amazing, you know, when I mean, I've got a few slides I can show you later on. Some of them are from my own facilitation training, which was 3 years ago. I can look at those pictures now and remember the conversations. I remember the things that people said, and I remember my own ideas in that room. So they really stick with you, because that's the power of it being in 3 dimensions. So it's based on a core process of, well, 4 steps really. Is that you ask a question. That would be the facilitator's job, to come up with those questions in advance. And that's really where lots of the art is, in coming up with those good questions. So you ask a question, then you get everybody to build. Then everybody gets to share. They go one by one and they'll tell you what their thinking was. They explain their model. And then there's the 4th stage, which is about reflection, where people get to ask questions about the model. But what's really important is that it does have this structure, and it has some rules which make it work, because play always has some rules, and it always has a beginning and an end point. That's what makes it play. But some of these things are really, really important to do this core process. For instance, everybody builds. What that means is that everybody gets equal chance to think. Because, you know, you normally go into a meeting room and maybe someone forgot to send the agenda, and some people like to have these things in advance. You know, the people with an extroversion preference, they're really great, they're thinking straight away, and the introversion preference, people wishing they'd seen it a week ago. Well, with Lego Serious Play, everybody gets the chance to think before they speak. So there's that period of silence of everybody's thinking. That's the 1st stage when they're building. Then everybody shares. So everybody gets equal chance to speak. Again, whether they're extroverted or introverted, whether they're resource investigators or shapers or monitor evaluators, they all get equal chance to speak. And also everybody listens. There's no interruptions. When someone's giving their explanation, there's no interruptions. But it's also important that the focus is always on the model. And that gives it a psychological safety, because the answer is always about the model and the questions are always to the model. And that gives you kind of permission to explore some topics which might sometimes be off limits, or some people are feeling a little bit uncomfortable about talking about. It's okay, because the model is your answer. Okay. And another rule which makes it really work very well is that once someone has explained, people can ask questions, but they ask questions to the model. And it's really important that nobody adds any meaning, because it's amazing when you ask questions of people how often we're adding more meaning at the same time. I can tell you more about that a little bit later. But anyway, that's just sort of in a nutshell what it's about. It's about helping people think and communicate with some rules that mean that it follows a process, and everybody gets equal chance to think and speak, and then come up with some great ideas.
Thank you very much for that. I'm trying. There's so many questions, aren't there? I mean, I think one thing is that it's not about the bricks themselves. like you said, that the bricks are the catalyst. It's not about the Lego.
It's also quite disarming, though, I think, because there are bricks, people do go into a different way of thinking. They relax. They almost like go into a childlike state, which is, this is safe, and I can think differently. I can play. It gets rid of lots of those anchors. The anchors I talked about, such as the whiteboard, the flip chart, the bowl of pens. The anchors are completely different. So you don't have the anchors of all those bad experiences you've had in a training room or a meeting room where you were just bored for hours on end.
So you're not going into that meeting room going, right, okay, or perhaps going into a training room, well, here's the manual. Okay, we know we're going to start on slide number 1. Like you say, you've got the sweets in the bowl, and you're immediately, because also sometimes you don't even want to be there. So you're in that room, aren't you? And if everything's always the same, you just sit there.
Well, what you're doing now is a really good demonstration, because there's a sort of one concept that keeps coming up in Lego Serious Play, and it's the idea of lean in. So lean in.
Okay.
Actually, can I share one of my slides with you just for a second?
Please do.
Just a slide from a session I did a few years ago with Anglia Ruskin. Can you see my slide there?
Yes, perfect.
Great. So that's just they're about halfway through a session there. But what you can see is that pretty much everybody's leaning in. And that's one of the concepts in Lego Serious Play. It's a lean in meeting. If we go back to having a look at us two, if we lean out, this is what you normally see.
It is, isn't it? Especially with that, come on, get it over and done with.
And you get this 80-20 thing where 20% of the people do 80% of the talking. And okay, that might be your CEO or your manager, but if you think about it in Belbin terms, that might be the shapers, it might be the resource investigators, and the monitor evaluators are probably just sitting back and soaking it all up, or the team worker doesn't want to rock the boat. But you get this 100-100 concept in Belbin, where you get 100% of the people are giving 100% their attention. And I did a session just yesterday, and you don't need to tell people not to use their mobile phones or not to use their email, because they just get engrossed immediately. As soon as there's some bricks, they forget about the person that's even sitting next to them for those 5 minutes when they're building. So the focus and the attention is absolutely incredible. And that's what's really engaging about it.
Can I just say, I have to agree with you there, because what Gez did last week is that he gave us all a big box of Lego, and he said, right, he gave it. I'm sure you'll talk about it in detail in a little bit, but I found myself, it was at the end of the day, it's been one of those days, and I thought, I need to get this done. I need to tick Gez Lego off my list. But actually, I got so into the things that I was building. I got really into, and I'm not a Lego type person. I don't have any patience for Lego at all. I took quite a long time doing it. And you're right, I didn't look at my phone. I didn't check any social media. I didn't check my emails. I got really absorbed. And I felt myself really interacting and thinking in a slightly different way. It allowed me to. I felt I had permission to, actually, by you sending that. This is what you've got to do. I had permission to think slightly differently.
And because it's play, there is permission to do things that otherwise people might look on and not agree with. But it also gives you, permission to do all sorts of other things as well. It's really empowering. I think it's really empowering. But the idea is, and I saw somebody mention subconscious in chat. I'm really not looking at chat.
You're not meant to be looking at chat, Des. I told you not to look.
I'm very easily distracted as a resource investigator. But someone mentioned the subconscious, and that's a lot of what's going on, because when you're building, you're tapping into this 95% of stuff that you didn't know that you know. We've got, I don't know if there's any hard data on it, but there's this 5% of stuff that you know, but there's an awful lot of stuff that you don't know that you know. And when you start building, we tell people, trust the process, trust your hands. If you can't think what to build, just build a cool model. But I've never seen anybody who's just built a cool model. At the end, they always say, oh yeah, actually I did think of something and it tapped into this and it made me think of something else. So yeah, it's really surprising that it peels back the layers, I suppose, of your consciousness and gets into what you didn't know that you know. And if you can do that with everybody in the room, it's just amazing, that potential that you've then got to solve problems or understand things much more clearly.
Thank you for that, Gez. I think we've got lots of things going on in the chat. So please do ignore it. One thing that people are asking is, what happens if you can't play? If you can't build? And I know I had that question right at the very beginning. So do you want to talk us through? So the books are a catalyst. They're there to be able to help facilitate, to be able to understand, but able for people to be able to communicate in a way that isn't always obvious, I suppose, if we're just always just talking or writing. But what about those people who I did when I first got, this is my duck, by the way, I made a duck. How do you help people who don't feel that they can do this?
Yeah, no, that's a really important thing. We wouldn't just send someone some bricks and say, right, let's jump into some really deep, difficult questions now. Because what you're going to do is, well, people are going to fall out of flow. The idea is the challenge is too big or they've not got the skills that they need. But the other way around is people have got all these skills and the questions aren't difficult enough. So you've got to keep people in flow, like this matching of they've got the skills and the challenge is big enough. So every Lego Serious Play session will begin with skills building, which means that you spend about the first hour or so doing some very basic exercises. And one of them is usually, let's build a tower. But actually, I could talk about the duck exercise briefly.
Go on. I think that's great.
Let's just jump onto that. But if I forget, bring me back the skills building in a second.
Okay, I'll write that down.
I will get distracted by the ducks just for a second. So let's have a quick look. Let me share my. Actually, I'll tell you what it was before I show you.
Okay.
So you see. Joe, could you just break up those 6 bricks that you've got in front of you? Could you show them?
Yeah,
oh,
okay.
I know, you're really precious about the duck. But I've got, can I show you here? I've got like 6.
Okay, 6.
You see mine as well? Okay.
Yeah.
So everybody in the Belbin team got 6 bricks.
It's broken a nail.
And they all got the same 6 bricks as well. And the question was build a duck. So 6 bricks, 1 question, and let me show you. Can you see my slides now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. So these are the ducks that certainly 7 of the team built there. The first thing that I think I asked you, well, what's the first thing that you notice about them, Joe? The first thing you said, they're all different.
Oh, different? How could that be?
Although there are actually 2 the same, which is very unusual, but there are 2 the same. But I've done this loads of times with lots and lots of other folks too, and I've got those on my next slides as well. Just another demonstration that you can give loads of people the same 6 bricks, they come up with completely different answers. But the point here is that this is similar to one of the exercises we would always do at the beginning of a Lego Serious Play workshop, whether it would be build a tower. The idea is that it's not a deep question, there's no deep meaning to it, but you just get everybody building, let them relax. But what everybody finds is they build something different. And the point is that even with the same question, the same bricks, everybody comes up with a totally different answer, but those answers are correct. There's no right or wrong answer. And that there's almost like a release with people then, because they start to relax. They're starting to go, okay, this isn't about being right. This isn't about my building skills. Even if they just built a tiny little tower or whatever, everybody can do that. And often we keep the building periods quite short, because if you give people half an hour, they just build more intricate models of the same thing. And it's not about how intricate the model is. Does it help you think? And does it help you explain your thinking to someone else? If it does both of those things, then the model's good enough. And as I said, you give people longer, they'll just add more things to it. It often doesn't add more meaning. It's just the same thing.
So you help people build. You help people feel that they're in the flow. And if it's a duck to them, it's a duck.
Absolutely. If it's a duck to you, it's a duck. And there's no right or wrong answers. That's really important. So everybody has a unique perspective. No 2 people see the same thing. And all the answers are correct. And usually a nice thing to say to everyone is, and you can all build. And they all go, oh, thank goodness for that. Because some people will be dying to get into it because they're mad on Lego. But some people, I've had people who've literally never played with it. They were from a particular part of the world where Lego just wasn't a thing, and it's their first time. but within about half an hour, you wouldn't know. You just wouldn't know. They're building with the same confidence as everybody.
Okay.
And what's cool, actually, sometimes you don't need to build. If you can just pick one brick, it could say what you want it to say. If you might pick, you know, like a windscreen off a car and say that's the window of opportunity. Well, that's what it is. That's all it needs to be. It doesn't have to be a fancy model.
So what we're looking at here, we're looking at bricks are the way in which people can communicate. You're communicating via the bricks. So in that case, and a few questions have come up, is that Lego Serious Play can be used for anything. There doesn't have to be a one why. And I know you were talking earlier, but actually it was yesterday, the day before, about this, is that what you found that this does is that it really helps you as a facilitator to be able to understand what the problems are within the room, what the questions are. And that's why Lego Serious Play really helps, because you can use it for any why, for any situation, for any team. It's quite loose from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it could be used for literally any question, but yeah, the possibilities are huge. I guess the thing about the question is really important, though, because it needs to be a really complex question where there isn't any fixed answer, or a question where somebody already knows the answer, or someone has the right to assume that they know the answer. It's not a training tool. You don't come in with something that you're the expert and you want to transfer that expertise to those people in the room. So that's why I said right in the beginning, it's a facilitation tool, not a consultancy tool. Because very often when organizations say they've got some sort of wicked problem or something like this, they'll say, let's get the consultants in. The consultants will come in and talk to people and look at the situation, and playing their expertise, they'll make a recommendation at the end. And that's a very much a top-down approach. And very often organizations don't buy into that because it's this top-down approach. Whereas with Lego Serious Play, the assumption is, because it's facilitation, that the answer is already in the room. You don't know it and you don't know what you know, but if we can unlock that knowledge and maybe make some new knowledge, and if we can facilitate that in a really constructive way where everyone gets equal opportunity, and you can find the answer yourselves. And it's so much more empowering when an organization can come up with it themselves. They'll buy into it because they came up with the answer. And for me, that's the essence of facilitation, not consultancy. And it's very much my approach to Belbin as well. And I know I can think of an example a few years ago where I went as the trainer to go and do 2 days with an organization in the Middle East. And we had 1 day of one-to-one coaching and another day where we were doing the Belbin workshop. And I was really put on the spot by the end because they were wanting me to be the consultant. They were saying, well, what should we do? What do you think we should do? How can we solve this? What do we need in this team? And I really had to try really, really hard to resist that and say, you know what, I don't know, because I don't know your team. I don't know your circumstances. I don't know the context here. But I'm facilitating. I can facilitate you to try and find your own answer, which is going to be a better answer because it comes from you. But I think it's so tempting to play the expert. I mean, this happens all the time in teams, in organizations. We want to look like we know what we're talking about. We want to look like the expert. So if someone asks us a question, we tell them what the answer is.
The answer is, yeah.
And I used to run training for PhD students who were learning to run tutorials for undergraduates in Cambridge. And that was the same approach there. If a student has a question, something they didn't understand, they ask the teacher or the supervisor, and that person usually feels good by giving them the answer, but it doesn't actually help, because next time they have a problem, they're going to ask again, and they'll ask again, and they'll ask again. And some sort of dependency comes along, and you're only getting one person's answer. Whereas if you can resist that temptation and facilitate and say, well, what do you think? What do you know so far? What is this? Are there any other people in the room who've got some other ideas? And that's what's behind my approach to Belbin. It's certainly what's behind Lego Serious Play. And if you could get organizations to think and work like that, they would be so much more powerful in solving their problems, I think.
Yeah, because they're owning them.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not being done to them. It's something that they're working together and they're owning, they're taking responsibility for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So going back to these bricks, it's interesting how I've taken apart my duck several times now and put it back together again. Do you have everybody building independently? Do people build together? So what I'm guessing, let me go back a stage, is I'm saying, right, you've been asked in because a team has an issue. Maybe they want to, what is our 5-year plan? It could be, what problems, we've got this problem, how do we solve it? Any of these could happen, or we're looking at a restructure, or it could be, does everybody then do stuff individually and they make stuff by themselves, or do they all make stuff together?
Good question. Good question. So I've got a couple of slides, and I'll bring those up in just a second. But so there's actually a range of different, I suppose, well, in Lego Serious Play Talk, you call it application techniques. The most simple one being individual building. So I ask a question, and then everybody individually builds their own answer. And I'll try and see if I can share one of my slides at the moment with you. So this slide is right back to when I did my own training years ago. Can you see my slide there?
Yes, perfect.
The question there was, why do you think people would want to do Lego Serious Play training? So my answer there was, on the top part of it, you can see those blocks with a skeleton there. That was representing what I think a lot of training looks like. It was sort of boring old buildings, tower blocks, people in the room dying, you know, there's probably skeletons from the last course. So lots of training courses, not that interesting. But the possibility that you could see this little island, which has got something fun on it, and that's where Lego Serious Play was. So we got something fun. That's just the little tiger there. And actually there's potential of growth. That's what the plants represent. But potentially, I've also got a little chest there with some money in it, because this is going to help the business, but also is also going to help me run my business as well. So anyway, that's just an example of individual model building. But what you can do after that is shared model building. And if I show you my next slide, which will hopefully pop up. Okay, so what you would ask the people around the table to do is select what they think is the most important part of their model, the core of their model, extract it and put it together with everyone else to make a shared model in the middle. And this isn't about trying to reach agreements where everybody agrees on the same thing. It's about everybody having something represented in that model and them being able to accept and understand what everyone else put there. And that might be, you know, the identity of your organization, or what do you think is the most important thing for your company to achieve? I don't know, there needs to be something where you've got some sort of agreement in the middle. And share models, I think, are really interesting, because this whole thing gives, you mentioned parity earlier on, giving everybody equal chance. Well, an example, recently I've been talking to one of the colleges nearby in Cambridge, and they were talking about, you know, they need to elect a new president for the college or whatever, and they wanted to get the opinions of everybody in a right cross-section across the college, right from you know, the senior fellows right through to the kitchen staff and the gardeners and the bedders or whatever it is. But how would you get all those people in a room and actually have some sort of equality? Because what's going to happen is the senior fellows are going to talk first, and then all the other people are probably going to echo what they heard from either the people they see as being more senior or higher up in the hierarchy. But with a shared model concept, you could get everybody to build individually and then put those ideas together. So you then got some sort of model in the middle. It's not a consensus. It's not about everybody reaching agreement, but it's everybody having their thoughts represented, that they can buy into that. Then what you can do is start building a landscape. This is going to take like a day or a day and a half or more. But you then start considering things like, what are the agents that affect what's going on there. It could be all the agents that would affect choosing a new president for your college or something. And you might think, well, how much are they going to get paid? What's their position going to be? Where are they going to live? Are they going to want to be here? And or are they going to be in another country which is in lockdown? Or so every one of those ideas would be represented by another model. So you have rounds and rounds of building until you get this really complex landscape, but it really helps people understand what's going on. And everybody has a shared same understanding there of what's going on. And then you might start to recognize what the links are between those things, which things are more important, but closer to the middle, the things which are less important being further away. And some of those links between things might be really rigid, and some of them might be quite loose. But sorry, were you going to say something? I could hear you pausing for breath.
I was. So I was thinking the lines here, that they're the connectors, are they? They're the things that are linking one aspect to another. But also I was thinking, this looks amazing. So immediately I'm thinking, wow, you could never get this on a flip chart. Could you? But then I'm also wondering, is how much do people have to really understand each element?
Oh, completely.
And how do you get to the fact that there you looks like you've got a board with a shark and a dog or something on it? How do we make sure that everybody understands what that means?
Once people have built their model, there's an opportunity to ask some questions. And certainly, if I go back to the shared model, it'd be absolutely essential that everybody has got the same understanding as that. So you would actually go around the room and ask each person turn by turn to tell the story that's represented there. They might tell it in a slightly different order, but everybody needs to say what's on there. And then you would, after that's been done, come to each person one by one and say, give us a score, give a mark out of 10 for that representation of the story. And they might give it a 7 or an 8. And you might say, well, why did you give it a 7 or 8? And you say, well, my thing wasn't quite represented, or they paraphrased a little bit. So it's not, people are not summarizing what you said or paraphrasing, or what they need to say is the words you used. Your meaning needs to have stayed the same, because this really demonstrates, well, the first time you do it, people might not be listening properly, but then they'll certainly go, okay, right, I clearly wasn't listening properly. So the next time it comes around, now they're really listening, but they're not just listening with their ears, they're listening with their eyes. And that's the real value of the Lego. We're not just hearing your words, we can see it with our eyes, and it's really helping us understand and remember. So then when that person repeats back what they heard, the meaning should be maintained. Nothing is lost, nothing's changed, nothing's added. The meaning is the meaning. And that's what the Lego is facilitating, really. Much, much clearer understanding and communication. And that's really what's at the bottom of it. Once you've got that much clearer communication, then we can make progress. Now we understand each other. Now I understand your perspective. I don't have to agree with it, but I can understand it. So these rounds and rounds of repeating, making sure the meaning has stayed the same, and giving people permission, if the meaning has been changed, to put their hand up and say, no, that's not what I said. My meaning has been changed there. So let's go back. Let's have another go at you repeating it and checking the understanding. So building is just a part of it. There's all these other parts which are checking the language, checking the understanding.
And I suppose what that does, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you think it's just playing with bricks and it's quite a loose concept, but actually you've got some quite strict rules in there. So to start with, people need to understand what it is, what is the question, what is the why are we doing this? You've got people having to learn how to understand how to build. You've got everybody needs to be included. There's no one person taking up any more airspace. It's quite, like you said, there's so many overlaps there with Belbin, isn't there? In the fact that everybody's voice should be heard. Perhaps everybody's voice isn't heard. Yeah. I think you know you've got that, and then you can build these wonderful landscapes, but not one person can just take over and put their viewpoint, put their stuff over the top of everybody else's, because you can't do that, because you've got to get agreement from everybody else, etc., etc.
That's very much the job of the facilitator, and that's what you're being paid for, really, to make sure that things are doing that. I mean, it might be that everybody behaves themselves and everything's great, But it's not just about behaving. I mean, it's just people's natural tendencies. Some people will get overexcited. Some people will ask lots of deep questions, you know.
Yeah.
But that's what the facilitator is there to do, is to maintain this parity. So, because I know I've run Belbin sessions with, you know, an executive team somewhere, and, you know, which team roles do you think are highly represented in the exec room? Well, it's the shapers. And you try running a workshop when you've got 3/4 of the people in that room are shapers. What you need are some principles and some rules of engagement where you can listen to each other. And it also, you know, it helps with the culture, because again, I've worked with another organization where there was an accounting team, or the, you know, the kind of the budget team, and they were all completer finishers. And they had an absence of resource investigators, and they recognized that was a bit of a weakness. But the conversation we had was, okay, so you haven't got any resource investigators? And they said, oh, we don't really need them. And I said, why is that? And it was a complete lack of understanding of they've got to look outside. They need to look at what the competitors are doing. Anyway, where I'm getting to on this is, I said, they said, yeah, we used to have a resource investigator, but he didn't last very long. He left. Well, it's not surprising that they left, because the culture. So I think what you can achieve in a Lego Serious Play session is you might be able to overcome cultural bias within a team, because, you know, there is self-selection. If you have got the finance team, there are going to be a lot of completer finishers there. So the meetings are typically going to follow a similar format. But that doesn't lend itself to the diversity that you need for effective teams.
Yeah.
Because if you think of the concept of Belbin opposites, you know, you do need the resource investigator to balance the completer finisher, because one's got the yin to the other one's yang. Whereas if you don't give them the time and space to voice their opinion and put forward their thoughts, they're not going to feel valued, and they're going to leave that team or organization.
I think you put it beautifully, actually, when we spoke the other day. You talked about how Lego Serious Play, it brings parity, but also it reaches the lonely guy. Yes. It reaches the one in the room who is, and we were talking about this, and it was interesting because I said, yeah, the lonely, yeah, you're reaching the monitor evaluator, because I've always got that, you know, the thinking roles are about a bit more out of it, aren't they? A bit more out of the team sometimes. But then you gave the example of, no, it could be anybody who's just perhaps very different to the rest of the team.
Absolutely,
it could be reaching out to the resource investigator.
Yeah, the resource investigator who's surrounded by the completer finishers. They might actually be the lonely guy. It's not just the stereotype of, oh, it's probably the completer finisher, or it's probably the monitor evaluator. So yeah, absolutely.
So what we've got here, we've got lots of questions coming in on the chat. I'd just like to intervene at this point and just say that Gez is going to give you lots of details, especially to his website, where he's got blog upon blog upon blog that will tell you far more about all of this in more detail. So don't worry, all of that research and the history and everything else, I'm sure you'll be able to get from there, and all of the other links as well, which people are very kindly putting on there.
Before I just wanted to mention, I mean, before we open it up to questions and things like that, just wanted to mention a little bit more about the second exercise that we did with
what we did.
Belbin. Yeah, if
yeah,
that's
please. Right. No, that would be fantastic.
Because if I come back to us for a second, I'll just try and share my slides with you.
And I get excited about this because I cannot do Lego. So if you're talking or you're thinking about anybody who has got an aversion to Lego, that was me.
Yeah, which bring you, I told you to keep me on track with the skills building.
Oh, sorry, skills building. You've got to get back to skills building, yes, sorry.
Absolutely. So just to follow that up, yeah, after you would do the tower, you'd do various other exercises. But the idea is to do exactly as you're saying. The people who are skeptical or the people who are over enthusiastic, get everybody to the same level so they're all comfortable with it. But anyway, what I was going to say was where Lego Serious Play came from originally was actually from within the Lego organization itself, when they were facing economic and business difficulties about 20 years ago. They kind of developed the tool to help them solve that, and then they realized it could be used for other things. But the holy grail of Lego Serious Play session is to do a real-time strategy or real-time business strategy. And the idea is that by looking at this landscape and then coming up with some scenarios, Like, we've got this whole network now. We understand the whole organization. We understand the people within it. What would happen if Donald Trump suddenly became the new president of that college that I was talking about? So start with something ridiculous. What would happen? And then you might come up with another scenario, which is a little bit more realistic, like all the students all over Cambridge suddenly need vaccinating, or all the students in Cambridge have to stay in college all of Christmas now. So something for this.
Yeah.
But then you start using that landscape to understand the impact of these scenarios. So this is almost like running a fire drill or generals playing war games or something. You start to visualize what will happen to this system, to this model, if we start pulling it in different directions, because things are going on. But the end point of this is you want to extract some simple guiding principles. So instead of creating a plan for an organization, you come up with principles that will help clear decision making later on. Because this year is a really good example of making plans. I don't know about you, but I have some holiday plans in March. Or your business might have had some plans in March, or maybe you were planning to get married this year or something like that. Turns out that plans aren't all that good in a changing world. What's much more useful are simple guiding principles, which will help you make informed, quick decisions. So anyway, I gave an exercise to you lot in the Belbin team around the simple guiding principles. So do you want to maybe explain what I asked you all to do, Jo?
Yeah, absolutely. So we all got a brown envelope full of Lego, and we opened it up, and there are instructions. And I think we were told not to communicate with other people, which I loved. I'd shut the door, go away. And we had to follow the instructions and come up with a pen cup or pen holder.
I'll see if I can share my
Can you find? I have mine because I'm so proud.
Yeah, I've got it. So, can you see that?
Brilliant.
Now, there's a fundamental difference between one group of the pen cups on the left and the pen cups on the right. So the pen cups on the left were given very clear and specific instructions, and
yeah, they were really detailed.
Yeah, my next slide. Yeah, that's what they look like on the left. Lots and lots of things. Do this, do that.
Yeah.
That was an example of giving an organization a plan to follow.
Yeah.
Have a look at some of those pen cups. There's a little bit of variation, because no matter how good your instructions are, they're often interpreted differently by different people. And a few people added a little bit of flair as well, didn't they, Jo?
They did. No, they did. And can I just tell everybody that number one is actually Nigel Belbin's? Can I say that? I've just said it, haven't I? And because he was just getting so frustrated by it, he had no time. He's got no patience. He's like, well, that would do, which was quite amusing. Whereas others spent a bit longer. Yeah, they had the instructions. They tried to keep to them, but they wanted to make it their own as well.
Okay, so the difference with the models on the right, I'll show you, they were built with simple guiding principles. So on the right of the slide there were only two instructions.
Yeah. Think
outside the box, don't ignore usability. And this was the result. So the people had the same bricks. The people in the first with the instructions, it didn't say use all the bricks. They just did what they told. But the people on the right, yeah, could you tell us a little bit about some of those models on the right there, Jo?
I can. So mine is number 5. I've got a little bit of a pen holder at the back for your favorite pen. That's for your favorite pen. It was interesting, isn't it? Because number 6 is actually done by one of our techie guys who's really high implementer. And we walked in actually, and he had all of his pieces just laid out. It was just beautiful. It was stunning even before he started building. And then he came up with this wonderful, which was interesting actually, because I didn't realize just how creative perhaps he was. I didn't realize that he had that, but I would just like to point out he hasn't used a Belbin pens. So he's fired from the marketing department. Yeah. But no, it's really interesting. I'll tell you what though, Gez, I felt really annoyed that I didn't have any instructions, because it would have been a lot easier if I had.
But I think that's fascinating about what you said about the team member who you're saying is a really strong implementer. Yeah. So like steps, like process, But actually, when given a little bit of freedom,
Yeah.
I mean, that didn't seem to hold him back at all.
No, that for me was wonderful learning, actually. Wonderful learning.
There's a little bit of plant in us all,
Yeah.
maybe.
Maybe there is. Maybe there is, but not with number one.
I wonder, it would have been really interesting if we gave Nigel the simple guiding principles, what he'd have done instead.
What would he have done? I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, the point of this is, I should say that this exercise is not Lego serious play. This is just an exercise using Lego to demonstrate a point of Lego serious play. But the point is that if you could get your organization to really pull out some simple guiding principles, then this is the sort of what you might be able to get your staff to be empowered to think differently, to stay on track, because they've got their simple guiding principles, but they find their own ways of working. They will find their own ways. And looking at some of those models, you can see that, I mean, you've got at the back of yours, I think, Joe, a special little thing for holding your favorite pen at the back.
Favorite pen holder.
Colorful. There's all sorts of innovations there. So yeah.
No, I thought it was wonderful. And I think just by doing this is a really simple exercise. It really did highlight the power of play for me. It highlighted that actually, if you have just got a plan and you stick to it going A, B, C, D, sometimes you can come unstuck like we all did in March. We'd never done a webinar before. Whereas if you can get to somehow using the Lego, if you can somehow use that to be able to come up with these guiding principles, it makes you more agile. It makes you more responsive to the environment, but it does require a lot of trust, doesn't it? There has to be that element in there as well, which I'm sure you can, build up by play. You can build up that safety, that trust within a team by using it.
I think, again, there's a really strong link here with Belbin, because I think what I often see in Belbin sessions is the language, the framework, the vocabulary, the use of the models or whatever. I mean, the team roles. It gives people permission to recognize who they are, but recognize who each other are, but with a language that's non-judgmental and accessible, and it's not fixed either. We can change, we can do different things, but the focus on weaknesses makes people recognize that nobody's perfect. We've all got vulnerabilities, and if managers and leaders can start to open up about their vulnerabilities and admit them, that gives the rest of the team permission to admit their vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And once you've got that much better understanding, then the team's going to progress. But if you're trying to cover things up, or then you're in a world of trouble. And I think it's this opening up to vulnerabilities and insecurities. That's what Lego serious play will give you, because I said it's that childlike thinking, and it's the psychological safety that the model provides, that you can talk about these things, and we talk to the model, we question the model, not the person. So trust, safety, then teams are going to flourish, I think.
John's just come up with a lovely comment there. He's put, let Lego do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's what you're doing, isn't it? And then what you're looking, again, like Graham says, you're looking at principles, not policies. And, whenever you're in the unknown, isn't it? Do you think, what's our policy for that? It's difficult. Whereas if you can say, well, what's our principle? What do we do? It's more, I suppose, of the why we do what we do. If we can find that, then coming up with the right answer in a situation when it's a little less tenable is going to be easier.
The idea of what's our principle, not what's the principle, because I think
that's a key.
If the team has generated it, they'll remember it. They contributed towards that. They'll understand it. They probably won't even have to look it up, because they'll just remember it. But it's that buy-in. I think that's what's so important.
I get that. Things aren't being done to them. They're not being given a handbook. They're not being given a manual. Between them, with complete equality, with complete parity, they've all lent in, and they've created this landscape. They've seen what might happen, and they all have understood it without trying to enforce their thoughts and opinions upon it. Guys, we've got 10 minutes now. This was always going to be one of those ones where we could talk for hours. Some people have got some quite specific questions. So, for example, can you do this online? Can you do this? And can you Lego play virtually?
That sounds like a setup question. Then
I wish it was.
That's what I was invited to go when I went to the Lego Serious Play conference in Denmark. I was speaking about my experience there. There are different ways of looking at it, and I've written blogs about this. So by all means, I'll share the blog with you if you want to have a look at that. My view of it is, yes, it can work, but in a limited way. For instance, when you do a bigger Lego Serious Play, you use a big kit like this, but for the short, for online, I keep it short, and I use a kit which has only got about 49 pieces in it, because I find people's concentration levels are shorter online. So I use a shorter format, a shorter kit, and I limit it to the individual model building, not the shared model building. Because I think it's the concept of there being a difference between remote and virtual. If we send Lego in the post to people, which I do, I did a workshop just yesterday with a college here in Cambridge talking about well-being. I can send them bricks. We can do remote Lego Serious Play as long as we're doing individual models. But as soon as we try making a shared model or landscape, we're going to have to start taking screen grabs of photographs of those models and put them on a virtual whiteboard. My own view of that, and I know it's shared by a few others in the community, but not everybody, is that then that becomes virtual Lego Serious Play, not remote. And you lose the third dimension. You're suddenly dealing with something in 2 dimensions. And my concern is that's no longer Lego Serious Play. We're dealing, we could put in, I appreciate, yeah, you've still got some of the original building, but when it comes to understanding each other, it is hard, and there's more barriers because of the communication, people's connections dropping out and those sorts of things. So I have done a lot of online Lego Serious Play, but I don't do anything longer than 2 hours. The numbers are small. I usually do about only 8 people rather than 12 people because the whole thing takes a little bit longer, and I use the smaller kit. But the smaller kit, I think, actually limits how long the workshop is, because there's fewer bricks. The same metaphors keep repeating because there's only so many bricks in there. I mean, people's creativity is endless, but once they've seen a little flower and they've given it a meaning, that meaning tends to come up in repeated rounds of questions. So a long answer, sorry, but
no, that's fine.
Yes,
so
no is the answer. Yes and no.
Okay. So to get the full experience, I mean, we talked before, if you're doing it from start to finish, it's 4 days.
Well, two would be. I reckon you could have a fantastic set. I mean, you can go as long as you like, but obviously I recognize. I mean, it's the same with Belbin. And how often have you been invited to do a 2-day Belbin session? Almost never.
No.
People want a 2-hour session, 3-hour session, and there's a certain conversation to have. Well, a shorter session means we have to manage the expectations about your output here, and we can't address every need that you have. But certainly I'd say a minimum of half a day for a good exploratory session where people can look at their self-identity and do some shared models. But if you want to get into landscapes, that's at least a day. And if you want to get to the simple guiding principles, that's a day and a half, 2 days.
Perfect. Thank you. A quick one. What's your ideal size of team if you've got people on this? How many people can you have developing a landscape together? Yeah.
We limit, 12 is a maximum.
Yeah.
You do, I mean, sometimes you see people doing sessions in conferences where there's hundreds of people, but that's usually like the duck exercise, something short, something which proves a point. But
something of meaning. It's going to be like Belbin. You want everybody to have a voice, don't you? And how many voices can be heard at once?
Same thing when we're running a Belbin workshop. We'd keep it to 12 because it just takes too long to go around the rounds of listening, because everybody gets a chance to speak.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, it gets bigger than 12. It just
right.
takes.
No, but it takes too much. Right. So brilliant. So I'm being really shaken up. Right. Yes. Great. We've got a few questions now about whether or not this is primarily to do with innovation, or it can be used with other things. But before you answer that, we've got another question saying, can you give us a handful of real questions that teams have had that you've used Lego Serious Play to help with? So I can understand, you know, people go, oh, it'd be wonderful for innovation, for new. Is it just for new? And can you give us some examples of some of the questions or some of the issues?
Well, for example, it depends on if you're working with individuals or a team, because actually I find myself working with individuals who don't know each other a lot of the time, because it's usually in a university and people have just signed up to a session. For things like that, I've looked at things like employability. So helping people look at, well, what does employability mean to you? That's an open question. Then you would say, where do you think your employability is now? And where do you want it to be in 2 years' time? And then trying to bridge that gap between, you know, you build a model, and people have built incredible models of things like, you know, they've just built walls feeling like they're boxed in at the moment, or their potential is they've put a load of some characters, you know, some maybe little animals behind a jail door, saying they've got all this potential, but they can't quite release it, they can't quite show it to other people. So that'd be a demonstration of that. But yeah, questions like, where's your employability now? Where do you want it to be? How are you going to bridge that gap? That would be an individual session. Sessions I've done on well-being, I ask people things like, build the perfect day for your well-being, and what's at the core of your well-being, or what are the steps to your improved well-being. So they're really, there's a phrase that Robert Rasmussen always has, which is that sufficiently unclear? Because the question needs to be sufficiently unclear, because if it's so specific, everybody's just going to build the same answer. It needs to be open to interpretation, open to your interpretation. I mean, I've sat in sessions with Per Christensen, who's another one of the creators, you know, an hour or more just talking about the art of making the right questions, because you can come up with any question, but it needs to be not so specific that everyone comes up with the same answer, but not so broad that people are completely freaked out by it. But other questions would be around, you know, what are the values of this organization? But you can also look at things like, what are the aspirational values of this organization? Or asking people, what is the identity of this organization? But how do you think outsiders look at the identity of this organization? So those are the sorts of questions, really, you know, they are, I hesitate using the word vague, but they're deliberately unclear, but inviting opinion. And what they should do is illuminate people's thinking.
Thank you ever so much for that, Gez. Crikey, we've covered a lot in an hour, and it is now 3 o'clock.
I thought this was a 2-hour session.
It was a 3 hour, I thought, but everybody's leaving. No, it was only an hour. So what have we done, really? Gez, it's been amazing. The way that you talk about it with such passion. I'm sure everybody's now getting lots of ideas that are coming here. What's, you know, how can we do things, or how can we use this? And don't worry, we will follow up with everything. But we're talking about Lego Serious Play is a facilitation tool, as is Belbin. Both can be used together really well, because they're both working from the premise that everybody's contribution is required and is equal. It's starting off with that complete parity. There's more to it than bricks. It's about being the facilitator. It's about not having a top-down approach. It's about having the team have buy-in for everything that they are doing. It's for the team coming up with their answers after using the Lego to be able to have that communication and understanding where the other person's coming from. Because if my duck is a duck, it's a duck. It's not going to be changed. I don't want anybody else to influence it. I've really got to understand that. Is there anything that you would like to add, just for everybody who has joined us today? And like I said, if you've got questions that haven't been answered, don't worry. I'm going to take a shot of all this. We'll make sure that we will get back to you.
I guess the thing we haven't really talked about is putting the two things together in a workshop. And I'd love to see that. I think you could open up the discussions with Belbin team roles, people starting to understand themselves. But then that's usually where workshops end. What I'd love to see that is followed by Lego Serious Play. And now let's apply what we've learned to something. Let's try and solve a problem. I think you put the two techniques together and it could be absolutely incredible. So that's what I'd love to see. Somebody invite me to do that.
Come on, let's do it. Can I come? Can I be involved? So it's the Belbin first. Let's give ourselves a language.
Yeah.
And then that's just a snapshot. That's where we are at the moment. Now this is the question, and let's use Lego Serious Play along with that language and understanding of Belbin. And that's where the beauty is.
Yeah.
So if anybody would like a workshop, please contact us at team@belbin.com and we'd be delighted to help.
And can I put the website?
Right, please put that all in there, please.
Yeah, just in case anybody wants to get in touch. Is that up there?
It is.
That is my office.
Everything's there. And your blogs are on your website as well, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely.
That's the camp training.
LinkedIn, but I must admit, I get loads of connections through LinkedIn, but people don't send messages. If you want to connect, just send me a little message as well saying, hey guys, was at the session, liked it, loathed it, whatever. And I'll be happy to connect. But yeah, that'd be great.
So thank you so much. As I did wonder, an hour wasn't long enough, so we'll have you back, Des, and we'll talk about that in more detail. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Join us next week if you want to know a little bit more about Belbin. Make sure you just check out what we're doing here. But it's been an absolute delight, Des. Sorry, Dr. Geraint Wyn Story, thank you so much for joining us today.